Today we have Dr. David Copeland, PhD and licensed mental health counselor, supervisor in Florida. So if you just take a minute, introduce yourself, just talk about what you're doing at the moment, and we'll just go from there. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, as you had already kind of read off, I've been a licensed clinical mental health counselor and as well as pastoral counselor. I have been been certified in clinical trauma specialist for a number of years now. A lot of it, as far as my background, I mean, oh my goodness, it depends on how far you want to go back. I mean, initially, when I was starting off in life, I was in music performance and had gone to recording studios, had copywritten music, and that really didn't seem to be going into place fast enough where I wanted it to be. And plus, I didn't know the music industry, so it's kind of hard to get someplace when you don't know.
Right.
Um, and so I kind of did a Monty Python thing where I was like, okay, now for something completely different. And I went and joined the military, and which was something I wasn't planned. It wasn't like I
Right.
had a high desire for it, but at the same point, I'm like, look, I can join the military. I can go ahead and it will provide stability, and so I can have a family. And from that point, I have always been in a position most of my life that uh, I've been in a counseling type mode. Even in high school, there was always people that wanted to come talk with me about different things that were going on. And, uh, even in afterwards, even being in the military, started off at, of course, basic training out there at Lackland,
Mm-hmm.
and quickly became the flight chaplain, is what they used to call me, because guys would be going through issues at home and really going through a mental breakdown, wanting to even quit basic training, and 2 o'clock in the morning, um, they'd be waking me up to be able to go talk with this person. And so, I mean, I've kind of been a counselor my whole life, but I hadn't been officially licensed.
Right.
And even in my military career, started off going to Bitburg, Germany, frontline Cold War, and originally, I joined the military to be able to do the job so I could have a family, but other people saw it really wasn't. They saw that I should be someplace else, and I had different people saying, "Oh man, you need to go be an officer because you got college and the way you present yourself." And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, "No, I'm just going to go ahead and keep doing what I'm doing."
Right.
And I love working on aircraft. I started off as an hydraulic system specialist on the F-15. And then when I got to my first base, it was frontline Cold War. So 12, 14-hour shifts, were pretty common. And then, when you had the Zulu alert launch, it was real world. So um, there's always been that cool element of being in the mission and in the mission mode.
Right.
Um, and being able to utilize the talents and abilities to accomplish that greater good. And also recognizing that if I didn't do my job well, I could cost my own life,
Mm-hmm.
because I had kind of that philosophy, and a lot of people are like, okay, that's weird. I'm like, no, if I don't do my job well in doing what I do and enable the pilot to be able to do exactly what he does to the nth degree,
Mm-hmm.
that means that now I have just given permission for the enemy to destroy me faster because I didn't do what I needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
But by making sure everything is done, we increase the odds of success.
Right.
And I had really good Air Force career, even after frontline Cold War, and after the fall of the wall, went straight into Desert Shield, Desert Storm. So I got to be a part of all of that, and then immediately after all of that kind of started seceding, spent a very short stint at Holloman Air Force Base as they were closing out the F-15s from Holloman, and they were moving the stealth fighters in there. and then moved to Eglin Air Force Base. And then I wasn't on the test side because some people go, "Ooh, Eglin Air Force Base, aren't you pish posh?" And I'm like, no, I'm not on that side of the base. I worked on the 33rd Fighter Wing side, which was the nomads. We were always gone doing different things for air superiority across the world, wherever we were called to be able to do. And we spent a lot of times away over to the desert, during the holidays and everything else. That song, I'll Be Home for Christmas, it really irked me because I'm like, no, I'm not. I know exactly where I'm going to be,
Yeah,
Uh,
far away.
yeah, far away. But, even when I went to different things, I wound up kind of tuning into the idea of, okay, wherever you go, there you are. And there must be a meaning or purpose for it. And so I wound up paying closer attention. And the next thing you know, I'm meeting different people from different parts of the world that were also going through having their own challenges or having their own issues, or some of the guys even, that I worked with that normally you'd never really get to have an in-depth conversation with. And so, I was still moving into that modality of, focusing in on helping people and, having a faith-based background as well, being able to, navigate through different challenges with different people and helping them to have a better way of having a better day. And, but that's when I also discovered that, my faith that I had at that time wasn't, I was sincere, and I really believed, but at the same point, I was taught to do certain things through religious practices that were not beneficial.
Okay, like what?
Like, in other words, you would, when I was a lot younger, I would be taught by the older men that were there how to be able to go ahead and, you know, defend the faith. In other words, if you have a particular point of view of faith, but you don't believe what we believe, then I'm going to know all the scriptures to be able to devalue what you believe, to be able to show how what I believe is,
Superior,
better.
right?
And so, but that's, you can only do what you know in life.
Right.
And so, but that's when I really started going through and examining my own faith and started really kind of going, well, wait a minute, this is, I can be right, but still miss the point. Because what I was doing was, winning the fight instead of meeting the person where they were at, and really being able to help them to come into a better understanding and helping them progress with their own faith. And that was kind of an eye-awakening thing for me.
Right. You may be right, but you just build a wall in between you and them if you're defending your faith, right?
Yeah. And what was happening was, and I kind of equate this, even in the book that I wrote, there's a segment where I went through and had talked about, being trained to be a gunslinger. But I forgot that the Bible is actually a sword. Being a gunslinger, you can shoot different things across, but that's the wrong approach, wrong tool, and wrong way of thinking about it. But during my Air Force career, of course, I really loved doing it, and I loved being the specialist in the systems of the aircraft, because to me that was what my job was. And if I do my job really well, then I get to live another day and help my team live another day to be able to do what we need to do. And a lot of pilots really like that too. And it was refreshing for a lot of them that actually got it, because I would talk with them about, what are you doing today? So anyway, chasing down a rabbit trail here.
So after the military, how did you get into counseling? Like, did you seek it out? Did you know for sure that's what you wanted to do? Did you start doing some courses or college while you were in the military before getting out?
Well, interesting enough, I had always been questioning everything.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of books that I would go through and I would purchase without being assigned by the school, but I would purchase these books and reading it like Man's Search for Meaning, well, like Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was the father of existentialism, and which one of his greatest ideas was in life the greatest freedom that we have is our ability to choose our attitude in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So even though everything is going horrible, we can still have power to choose the way that we face it.
Right.
And that way we never have to be afraid because, death is inevitable. And of course, he built a lot of his theory by being, he was a Jewish psychologist who survived the concentration camps. So it's a really neat read. But I also had a number of other books that I was reading that were more psychologically based and trying to figure out, how to be able to make ends meet. And in the meantime, I had a niche and a knack. I had kids that were growing up and they were, being teenagers, and we were, going to church. And so I would volunteer to be working with the youth, and then wound up having a niche working with youth groups and with different youth, and really loved it. It gave me more energy doing that than anything. And even at one point in my military career, I thought about, well, maybe I just need to get out and be a youth minister. And that's when a lot of people were like, no, don't do it. Primarily because, ministry and ministry work is highly volatile.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were like, you're over your 10, just stay in, get your, retirement, get your benefits. And then if you want to enter into it. And so, I went ahead and continued to stay the course and got to do a lot of other cool things in the Air Force. Got to be an instructional systems design person building training courses.
Oh, wow.
And some of the courses, as a matter of fact, in 2003, I developed like 27 different training courses. And Eglin Air Force Base was named Maintenance Training Flight of the Year that year for the very first time in Air Combat Command. And
Nice.
a lot of the programs I developed went worldwide. And so that was kind of cool.
That is cool.
And so as I was going through everything, went to Korea for a year. But with each mission or with each TDY, with each place that I would get sent, I started tuning into the understanding and realization that, okay, I don't know why I'm here, but whatever that is that needs to be addressed here, let's get on with it. If you got a person that's going through crisis or spiritual crisis or whatever, it's kind of like saying, okay, God, why am I here now? What am I doing here? But the more comfortable I got with the idea of, okay, I don't know, but whatever it is, it's going to be successful. And even in Korea, I found a number of individuals that were going through different, what would be called spiritual crisis and or challenges with their wives and, being separated. And so all along, while I've been in the Air Force, I've been kind of counseling throughout my career. When I retired in 2007, I went ahead and entered into the youth ministry, which was my old track where I was like, yeah, this is going to be cool.
Right.
So I entered into youth ministry, and that's when I was like, oh my gosh, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And, there's a lot of people that need help, and different people that I thought that would be able to help them. It wound up not being, I was disappointed because I thought there would be systems that would be in place to actually help people. And when I kind of figured out that it wasn't working that way, I was like, oh man, somebody needs to do something. And then there was that part of me that inside goes, oh crap, I'm somebody. So going through and having all these technical degrees and different specialties, I entered back into going into a counseling track and doing online school with Liberty University, where I could have both the faith-based and as well as the secular. So it's almost like signing up for two schools at the same time, because you got
Right.
to have both. You got to create both vision. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and then as I was going through doing the different work there and continuing to make progress, I was amazed at how many books that I'd already read that they were assigning me to read in those classes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, I've already kind of been on this path and track for a long time anyway. So it kind of, made me chuckle a little. Um, and so going into, you know, this is where it really gets weird, because when you go through and you're developing, everything seems to be on track in life,
Mm-hmm.
and everything, you're just like, man, this is awesome. We've got everything going together and all the pieces are fitting together. And because I have had different times um, where I needed a course correction, because,
Right.
sometimes I really wasn't tuned in or listening in the right way. Um, and but in that course correction, what I discovered, because it was really bugging me, being in a ministry position and then noticing the different families that were on fire with people that didn't know what to do, and the predominance of trauma that nobody wants to talk about, because they just, they just need to get over that.
Right.
And I was like, but do you have evidence that the person is not able to get over it? So I
Mm-hmm.
doubled down on my efforts and really became specialized in trauma, primarily because I recognized it is everywhere.
It really is.
And, it's not uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
But, and one of my favorite things to do in my office is actually to help educate people about the design of the brain. Fearfully and Wonderfully Made is a real succinct understatement to our being. Um, so when you take a look at, and when you consider that when trauma happens, it goes through this process of the way it stores in memory, and the brain actually stores in the subcortical region. So I know that you probably can't see me because this is obviously an audio recording, but if you would just make a fist with your hands, so the front, but do a bad fist, keep the thumb on the inside of the fist. Now, don't hit anybody like that. You can break your thumb. So I'm just giving a disclaimer right here. Don't hit people in a bad way. You shouldn't hit people at all. But so if you've got what I would call a hand brain, and that the four fingers that are up across the top of the thumb, that represents your frontal cortex. So if you open up your frontal cortex and you look where the thumb is, that would be like your limbic system, which holds the amygdala, which is your fight or flight. Okay. Below that, where the thumb and where the meaty part of the thumb goes all the way down into the forearm, that's like your base brain tied back in with your uh, brain stem and your all the electrical synaptics that tie back through the entire body, through your uh, not just your limbic system, but polyvagal, polyvagus and polyvagal nerve systems. Okay. And so both of those run through the entire regions from the base brain, and the base brain also contains your autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is what automatically regulates everything in your body, and it is in the subcortical region, which is great. Having an automatic system that operates for you, keeps your heart beating. You don't have to think to breathe because it's doing it for you automatically. You don't have to think to digest your food because it's happening automatically.
Mm-hmm.
So with your hand, and if you got the four up and where the thumb crosses over the palm, if you put your finger right in the middle of where the thumb and the palm kind of come together, that's about the size of the amygdala, which is about the size of an almond. Okay.
Okay.
And that's what fires off to be able to do a dramatic shift. So let's look at the firing sequence, if you will. The amygdala, about the size of the almond, sitting in the middle of your limbic system, when it senses that there is danger and that there is some emergency situation that you got to go, fight or flight, it has the automatic signal that sends the signal to the autonomic nervous system, which shuts off your frontal cortex because it's not time to figure out Pythagorean theorem or logic or reason anything. It's time to do or die. So it bypasses the braking system to have immediate reaction to survive. Now, the autonomic nervous system also shuts down all non-essential systems in the body. It's not time to digest food. It's not time to have sex. So all of these other regions, all the energy is now being redirected back into fight or flight. You got that noradrenaline rush that goes through.
Yeah.
And as you have that noradrenaline rush, it increases your oxygen intake. It sends out a signal to be able to numb out the different systems. So if you get hurt while doing the fight or flight, you don't notice it. So you can wind up having a broken arm or something that gets broken. You can hear a snap, but because you're fight or flighting, you're not going to stop to go,
Right.
oh, I think I broke something. No, it's time to do or die. You'll worry about it later. And
Yeah.
usually as the noradrenaline rush wears off and you gotten into a better sequence and the frontal cortex starts coming online, because everything, you go from the emergency mode of like a, ejection seat on a fighter. The emergency happens, the ejection seat flies out to escape the situation. And then the drogue chute pops out, starts slowing everything down because you cannot have the parachute open at Mach speeds. So it decelerates. And when it finally gets slow enough, then the main drogue chute will open. Okay. That will allow you to be able to, safely land, if you will.
Right.
And so whenever you take a look at it from that, and the frontal cortex is coming online as the parachute, the parasympathetic side, you got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Sympathetic is where the ejection seat is, and there you go. And then the parasympathetic ties back into the deceleration, which also means any extra noradrenaline that you have, it can cause you to have the shakes because it's just trying to burn off the extra noradrenaline rush that's happened. In the meantime, you can feel exhausted. You just feel drained. But all of it is normal. It could almost resemble depression. So when you take a look at, the ability and what the brain does to be able to maintain that homeostasis, you can have those uppers shoot through the top, which keep us in hypervigilance. And you have the opposite end that can go to hypovigilance. In other words, like a depressive type state. Right. Anxiety versus depression. So one of the things I started noticing in all of the different studies and dealing with trauma and how the body and the brain work together, it is this tie-in with, if you have somebody that's really anxious or you have somebody that's really depressed, they've blown through their homeostasis place, but why? What's really going on? Well, when you had the amygdala that fires off, frontal cortex goes offline, all non-essential systems shut down, re-energizing everything back through the entire body. With the frontal cortex being offline, anything that happens emotionally stores in the limbic system. Anything that stores physically within the body stores in the base brain. So now you have this storage of information based upon the trauma that you've experienced. And then as things slow down, the frontal cortex comes back online, which is a different memory system. And because it doesn't really remember everything that happened, It makes up the story to make it sound reasonable. It's the genius of the brain.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. I think this is really what took place. And meanwhile, you can, it'd be like if you had a family reunion and when y'all were kids, one of your cousins fell out of the tree and broke their arm, and you saw what happened, but then later on down the years, you come back for another family reunion, and that cousin starts talking about all kinds of crazy ideas of how he broke his arm.
Right.
And you're sitting there looking at him going, dude, that's not what happened. But to their brain and the genius of the brain made up a narrative just to be able to make sense of what's
Rationalize it.
going on. Yeah. It rationalizes so you can survive. Nothing to see here. Move along, move along. And so in the meantime, that which is stored in the subcortical creates an emergency mode. And that emergency mode, when it gets set in place, it does some really interesting things. One thing that I've noticed in working with even combat veterans or any type of trauma work that I've done, the brain, when it makes that emergency mode, also does a mad grab of memory surrounding that area, and it's non-discriminate. It doesn't care whether it's good memories, bad memories, and different memories. It just grabs anything within that time zone, shoves it back down into that emergency mode because it wants to protect you from re-experiencing whatever that was. And so you wind up with good memories being locked in to that emergency mode, as well as the bad memories, because the brain doesn't discriminate. It says, nope, okay, we're now going to put it in this emergency mode. And then you live your life. But the emergency mode that has been created stays online. It is now present to do its job. If anything gets close to experiencing what happened, well, all of a sudden you'll start getting more anxious. Right. And it will be harder to concentrate. You'll not be able to remember things. You might have different pain in your body that you can't figure out, why am I having this pain? So the genius of the brain winds up being there and creating these protective modes to be able to help us to survive, to live another day. And they're on all the time. But even when the emergency situation is no longer existing, the emergency mode at the subcortical level of the brain continues to stay online, believing that it can happen again at any moment. So my favorite part in talking with people about this is helping them to understand that, number one, you're not crazy.
Right.
The brain is totally doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is genius at keeping you alive, even to the point where you're at today. Now, having this awareness, now you can move into a different modality and say, wow, okay, yeah, I'm surviving, but
it's miserable.
Yeah. And so what I've noticed was, even in working in, because I spent a couple of years even working in a medicated assistant treatment program, a methadone program. They were using methadone to help treat opiates. I had a caseload of 130, and I wound up really taking a closer look as I was, entering into the addictions arena. And I started quickly figuring out that 90% of the clients that I had complex PTSD from early childhood even. And that was really an eye-opener for me, because when I finally recognized it, I was like, wait a minute, why are we, if we're just treating it for addiction, why are we putting Band-Aids on bullet holes?
Yeah.
And so I went and talked with some of the main counselors that were there. And, they're like, oh, well, we don't treat trauma here. We send that over to this other place for that.
We only treat coping mechanisms here.
Yeah. And I'm like, how can you go through cognitive behavioral therapy in a
Right.
group setting and the people
Hmm.
aren't even in the same room with you?
Yeah.
So this doesn't make any sense.
Hmm.
Of course, I was not around too much longer when I pointed out the emperor has no clothes. Um, and for those that don't know that story, or I guess I'm showing my age, when I was growing up, they had the story of the emperor's new clothes.
Hmm.
And if you haven't seen or read the story, uh, take a look at it, find it on YouTube or something, and it's a great way of learning that you need to speak up even when it's embarrassing for everybody else. But be careful what you believe, which might actually be one of the best books for today's situation that we have
Right.
within our whole dynamic experience of life. So trauma, the way it stores, is genius. So I started looking at different modalities of being able to help individuals with trauma issues to get relief faster. Talk therapy is something that's been along, even with Sigmund Freud. Um, and, it's really interesting. The psychoanalysis, the talking cure. But the
Hmm.
problem is when we talk, we're conversing with the frontal cortex, that forefinger across the top of the brain. Notice how the subcortical region is a little bit bigger. So when you go in and you do talk therapy, the only region of the brain you're reaching is up in the frontal cortex.
Right.
And when you have somebody that goes, well, how do you feel? Well, I think I feel. Well, that's
Right.
two different regions of the brain. If you're thinking, that's your frontal cortex. If you're noticing, that's your subcortical. So
Hmm.
as a person takes into account, um, and there's a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy and there's other modalities out there. The majority of psychotherapies practiced currently are variants of talk therapy. While these treatments are highly diverse and well developed and generally effective, most of these approaches are relationally based and require that the therapist be highly attuned to the client.
Hmm.
In psychotherapy speak, there must be a level of relational attunement, meaning the therapist must pay close attention not only to the clients, but also the dynamics of the relationship between themselves and the client, which mirrors and reveals the client's experience with the primary caretakers of their childhood, like their mother, especially when you're dealing with some of Sigmund Freud's ideas. The problem is, and has been, that most talk-based therapies tend to be unfocused, and it takes months or even years of sessions for relief and change to occur.
Right.
And so you got some other technical therapies like EMDR, which place the primary emphasis on the procedures the client has to follow.
Hmm.
And these procedures are technical and not relational because they require the therapist to lead the client through specifically outlined steps. And the degree of attention to technique draws attention away from the essence of the relationship between the client and the therapist.
Mm.
And so, as effective as EMDR is, by using it, the therapist attuned relationship with the client does not receive enough attention. Also, scientifically, EMDR works great for onesies or one or two type of traumas. Complex traumas, EMDR doesn't work as well
Mm.
because there's just too much.
Right.
Now, because I know that one of our other topics that we really wanted to get in today was in brain spotting.
Right.
And so let me do a little bit of a contrast between EMDR and brain spotting. So the EMDR, by using it, the therapist's attuned relationship with the client does not receive enough attention. So by contrast, brain spotting is built on a model where the therapist simultaneously attunes to the client and the client's brain process. With brain spotting, neither the relational attunement nor the attunement of the client's brain body process needs to be sacrificed for the other. In fact, when the two attunements are interwoven together, the healing process is far more powerful and lasting. A long time ago, before I knew about brain spotting, I witnessed, being in that addictions clinic, for instance, I witnessed firsthand the disconnect when you're trying to, talk with someone that's not even in the same room with you.
Right.
And so I would try to go back through and do what I was taught in school, with my degree and the degrees that I have, and but it wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no surprise with that. Really, brain spotting combines the attunements of both the types of therapy. Even you can use some of the focus in on talk therapy, but you're not taking over the session. You're
Right.
allowing the client to go in the direction that they're going without altering course. So, one of the things, as you go through and you start looking at brain spotting, the main motto of brain spotting is where you look affects how you feel. So if something is bothering you, how you feel about it will literally change depending upon whether you're looking off to your right or to your left. Our eyes and brains are intricately woven together, and the vision is a primary way that we orient ourselves to the environment. And so the signals sent from our eyes are deeply processed within the brain, and then the brain reflexively and intuitively redirects where we look moment to moment. So the brain is an incredible processing machine that digests and organizes everything we experience. But trauma can overwhelm the brain's processing capacity, which leaves behind pieces of trauma frozen in an unprocessed state. So brain spotting uses the field of vision to find where we are holding these traumas in our brain. Just as the eyes naturally scan the outside environment for information, they can also be used to scan our inside environments, our brains, for information.
Mm-hmm.
So brain spotting uses the visual field to turn the scanner back on itself and guide the brain to find the lost internal information. One of the ways that I kind of have described it is it's defragmenting the computer. You got these fragmented files, but you don't really know where they are. And so by turning the processing back into itself, it can recognize where those fragmented files are and can reorganize them in such a way that instead of the trauma being a driving ongoing force, it is now put into a historical perspective without the underlying driving force that gives hypervigilance.
Mm.
And it feels weird when you go ahead.
I think there's different methods of doing this, but what are some of the methods that you've seen that are successful in help guiding someone doing an internal scan? Like I'm just trying to get a better understanding of brain spotting. Like, so someone knows like what are they actually doing, like physically, like in one of these sessions?
Well, okay, and that really depends on how attuned they are to themselves.
Okay.
A lot of people, they don't know what they feel,
right?
Because they've never been allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
A matter of fact, even when I have worked with, special forces, combat special forces individuals, even the door kickers and those who have gone through extreme circumstance, when you ask them to start feeling, it is a very uncomfortable zone.
Oh yeah. I pretended I
Because
was fine for years.
yeah, and so this is interesting because the way I help them to overcome and to be able to see things from a different perspective, if they're not used to what they're feeling, is we can, if you've ever gone to the beach, I live here in Florida, I know you're there in Hawaii, but if you've ever gone to the beach and have you ever fought the waves? And, I've had some guys that go, yeah, I fought the waves. It's a great workout. And I said, yeah, but what happens eventually? You wear yourself out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, yeah. And I said, well, what if you just ignore the waves and a big one came, knocked you over and sucked you under? It kind of sent you to a panic attack, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they're like, well, yeah. I said, so either we can fight our emotions or we can ignore our emotions. If we fight our emotions, we're going to wear ourselves out. If we ignore our emotions, it's going to kick our butt.
Right.
And so there has to be an awareness and also beginning understanding that emotions are amoral. They're not good or bad, but
Mm-hmm.
they're just giving us an indication that something may be out of balance. Um, one of the ways I have, and I'll just say it, the goal of emotion is to create behavior to be able to find balance. Okay.
Okay.
So let me say it again. The goal of emotion is to create behavior to be able to find balance. When we live in an out of balance situation, we're always going to be driven to get that need met, even at the subcortical level. And, I've spent, the last several years and even before working with kids. And one of my favorite age groups to work with, actually, I worked for like 3 years in a child development center, doing child youth behavioral work with military families. And it was fun because during my day job, I would be there working with the kids there and with the families. And then in the evenings, I would go and meet individually with, individuals with PTSD and complex PTSD issues. And a lot of people, when they would say, oh my gosh, well, how in the world do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's because it's emotions based. It's the same ocean of emotion. Kids just don't have a way of communicating, more effectively what they're feeling. So their behavior is that which drives them to behave in the different ways that they are because of unmet needs. We do the same thing as adults.
Right.
And, in relationships, it's really important. Now, I think one of the saddest things is when you have a parent that has a 2 or 3 year old child and the child is having a meltdown. And the parent is standing there logicking their child. Now, little Timmy,
Mm-hmm.
don't you know if you don't do this right, then, you totally miss the person. You totally miss where
Right.
they're at. You totally miss that child and their experience that has put them into this out of balance situation. But when you recognize it, you can quickly tune in and come along beside them. And when that need is met, guess what happens? The emotional reactivity. You know, same thing happens with adults. You know, when we feel like we're being heard, we feel loved.
Mm-hmm.
But when we don't feel heard, we don't feel loved. But we need love just like oxygen. And if that love is cut off, well, it gets to be very scary very quickly
Right.
because you need oxygen.
Yep.
So you need that connectivity. But when you've lived in an environment where you question, is it safe to connect? Then all of a sudden they're caught between two different zones. This is where the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder could be
Mm-hmm.
given to different people because on one hand, they really want to be able to connect. And yet on the other hand, they push people away because it's not safe.
Right.
And so they have this internalized struggle. Um, and there's a lot of that takes place.
Uh,
So go
I had
ahead.
I had a question I was curious of. You've been all over the place. You've helped different people, whether it be children, addicts, people recovering with complex PTSD. I was just curious, have you seen any commonality between those who have trauma stored and those who haven't? Like maybe those who are more in tune with their emotions and feelings, who can actually feel it and process it, are less likely to store it in a negative way, opposed to those who are, I don't know, maybe taught just pull up your bootstraps, get after it, kind of thing. And those people tend to just suppress everything and just keep moving forward. And then eventually it becomes a systemic problem. I'm just curious if you've seen anything like that.
One of the big components of trauma is they find it deals with attachment, starting off in early childhood. We
Okay.
start learning how to be able to survive. So when you take a look at maybe a person who has parents that have been thrown in jail, or are absent, or they are addicts and are out chasing the next high and just leaving the kids at home,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it puts children at a very they become very aware very fast that they have to go ahead and do whatever it needs to do to survive, because they can't rely or trust anyone.
Right.
So the experience of not having the ability to trust anyone because you can't rely on them stays ingrained within them, and it stays at their core from a very early age.
Mm.
Individuals who grow up in a safe, healthy environment, they have a different way within their brain to be able to process. Instead of survival, they learn how to be able to respond and how to love. We can react in fear,
Right.
or we can respond in love. And when we have lived a life where we've learned how to be able to react in fear, to be able to survive, to live another day, everything is based in reacting or planning on that next step to be able to get whatever it is that you think that you need. And that can lead down some pretty dark paths as far as addiction or survival behaviors, survival modes. And if you have a healthy environment where the child is raised with fully functioning parents, and you have a secured attachment, the child learns how to be able to manage their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
They have they get to go through and have the experience of, oh, well, this is what you do when you do it, and I have good models to follow. Oh, okay, cool. But in a chaos, and even if a child feels something and they have a meltdown, and the parent says, if you want something to cry about, I'll give you something to cry about, because they're not even tuned into their kid.
Right.
And so developmentally, our attachment and the different attachment styles that we've experienced in life also add on to our emotional vulnerabilities that can lead to uh, further trauma processes being installed, because there's no way of um, a child, even if the parent goes through and makes different comments, for instance, like, I wish you were never born,
Mm.
or, you'll never amount to anything. These phrases, because it's so early, um, create psychological blocks that become a belief system in order to survive, to try to be loved by that person who's saying those things. You have to believe it. If
Right.
you don't believe it, then, oh, you're even worse child, and I'm going to beat you more, for instance.
Mm.
Um, so we all have our experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and trauma is subjective to the person that experiences it. But what I'm finding in life, we are all going to go through something that is traumatic. you know, um, because life is hard, love is hard,
Right.
but it doesn't mean it's impossible. So if we stay stuck, and this is kind of where the book that I had just written, Westbow Press published it, and the book's title is God's Healing Process: An Everyday State of Grace Existence. I go through and I have the combination of science and as well as faith, because there's a lot of faith-based things that are there that make a lot of sense. And that when you look at it from a certain perspective, or profoundly, they have profound evidence. For example, I had developed my GHP theory, which is, God's healing process. I developed that theory in 2011 because I was really looking for a way of being able to help families to be able to have greater stability and to be able to have, a better way of having a better day, you know. And what I discovered was, while I was doing this one class, I've been trained on the SFT Searching for Truth Awareness program, which comes out of Tennessee. Ron Wilkins had actually written a book, Removing Emotional Pain. And I went through it and was getting trained, got fully trained on it. And I did an adult Bible class on a Wednesday night. And while I was going through it, and I started recognizing people that have been Christians 10, 20, 30, some 40 years would look at that pain event cycle, and almost every single one of them would say, "Oh my gosh, that's my life. How did you know?" And at that point, I was kind of surprised because I thought, we would be doing better than, especially if we've been going through the motions of, Christian, being a Christian and walking in a faith, that there would be more love and less fear. But what I found was people that have been going through their Christian, quote unquote, Christian walk, only to find out that there's whitewashed tombs and inside rotting corpses. And it upset some very high-powered people and where I was working at the time as a youth minister. And not too surprisingly, not too long after that, they decided to get away with the youth minister position.
Convenient.
Because what I did is I actually showed, and I had another counselor that same year. It was really weird. That same year, the church secretary that was really a straight shooter. She was really cool, but she also had her own trauma past. But she was of the mindset and mind frame of, hey, just pull your boots up, get on with it, get over it. It's in the past, Now, sadly enough, she wound up passing that year. It was like 1 week. I had gone in and I was going through the graduate classes. And the week I got there to be able to go through one of the most stressful, I had the testing and different testing and stuff I had to get done. That was the high level stressors for being able to even pass my graduate coursework. She wound up passing away in her sleep from a bowel aneurysm within her intestines.
Yeah.
And I thought it was rather interesting because, a lot of medical doctors have even gone through, and if you take a look at WebMD, they ask the question, okay, if you take a look up there, see disease origin unknown. Okay. And that's there a lot, So one of the things that I noticed was whenever we're at ease, we have a balance. But if we're not in balance, then we're at a dis-ease, which is also disease, which means our emotional vulnerabilities that we wind up carrying within us, even if we ignore them, doesn't mean that it is sucking the life out of us. Because when you think about the emergency modes that get created with trauma, they also drain off energy. That takes energy to be able to supply them with the power that they need. And also because of the way trauma stores, even physically in the base brain, physically in the body, there are energy blocks that can be created because of the emergency mode that limits the operation of our body so that we can survive to live another day. And, when I started really taking a look at the bigger picture, you know, come up with the whole GHP process. In the Bible class, I went ahead and pulled it up, and I showed the whole GHP, and that did the comparison between the two, and it started freaking a lot of people out because as one counselor that I showed her, well, I'll give you some background on that counselor. Church secretary passed, and then after I got back from the main intensive class I was going to at Liberty at that time, that following week, my father passed. So two main support structures that were in my life that I really relied on the most were just basically ripped out from underneath me.
Right.
And then not too long right after that, about a month after that, is when I was told, oh, well, we're doing away with your position. So what I've learned in life is sometimes I have a really hard time taking direction from God, and he uses extreme ways of redirecting me.
Right.
Which is, I'm like, doggone it. But sometimes he has a hard time getting my attention. Go figure.
I'm stubborn also.
Yeah. And we get fixated. We're like, this is it. This is where I need to be. This is what I need to be doing. And yet, nope. But there was a lot bigger picture that needed to be developed with the whole GHP. That also tied into me discovering the niche that I had and being able to work with people that have trauma. And it was kind of cool in a way because, entering into the field of counseling a lot, being a lot older, and then other people would say, well, how in the world, how do you know what you know? And you were just a former aircraft mechanic, and, you don't know nothing. And yet I had guys that were, when I was an aircraft mechanic, they were like, what in the world are you doing here?
Right.
You don't fit into, but I learned a lot about systems, and I love systems. So when we learn to pay attention to systems, then there's also multiple application to make across the broad spectrum. So anyway, my wife decided to print something in the background here.
Nope, that's good.
I don't know if you can hear it or not. All right, so it's been, when I went through and I went to the Emerald Coast Children Advocacy Center, and basically what they do there is they work with children who have gone through domestic violence, extreme neglect, sexual abuse, physical, emotional abuse, the whole gambit. And when I got in there and started working with them, some of the people that I was working with were also the parents. And I was like, okay, so cool. Let me go ahead and then, some of the other counselors that have been there for, of course, a couple of decades, they're like, oh, you think you can help someone, huh? Well, let me give you this parent. Because they would come in and I pointed out to them pretty quickly. I'm like, hey, if you go through and you have these kids and they go through counseling and they get better, and yet then they go back into a home environment, and then 6 months later, boomerang, everything is back.
Right.
Okay, well, something's got to give. And I said, yeah, that looks like there's issues going on with the parents. And the counselors are like, well, good luck working with them.
Right.
And so as I started working with them, they got better. And which confused a lot of the older seasoned counselors, because they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know. What were you doing? So I started kind of realizing that there was something within me that had a way of being able to attune and be able to be with people to help navigate, and not only navigate, but also heal historic wounds within the family, because there was a progression. And I noticed that one generation would have had sexual abuse that follows with the next generation that fall into the way of having sexual abuse. And then here we are with this child of this parent. And then as I'm working with the parent and start talking with them about the dynamics, only to go back further and figure out that, well, your mom was disconnected from you and didn't want to believe you as a child because they had their own issues. And in order to not have to deal with their own issues, they ignored everything, which left
Generational
you
trauma.
abandoned. Yeah, generational.
Yeah.
And I said, because when you start seeing it over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So I would talk with the different individuals and say, hey, go and let's just have a conversation with your parent about what was really going on. Because what I also noticed within individuals is whenever they have children of their own, the closer it gets to the age that they experience their trauma,
The worse it gets.
subcortically, they're activating
Right.
and becoming more and more anxious as that child is reaching the same age that they did, because inadvertently they wind up saying, I'm going to make sure this never happens to my child.
Right.
And, so it's really interesting when you look at it I like to look at it as the ocean of emotion. Okay. And what are we doing when we look at the ocean of emotion? Well, we look at the different waves that are coming in, the different emotions that are there that are giving us insight into unmet needs. What do we choose to do with those waves? We can dive through them and go, okay, cool. We can bounce up with them and kind of go with the flow. We could fight them and get exhausted. We could, body surf. We could use a surfboard and use the energy to be able to be more productive, to do other cool things.
Mm-hmm.
But we get to decide, what is it we want to do with this emotion? And what is this emotion really trying to give us insight to? That's when you get to do and get to choose and have a way of directing yourself. But if you've always been closed off and it's not safe for you to be able to express or experience any emotion, how does brain spotting work, especially when it's experiential and it's highly intuitive? Well, there are different ways of accessing the subcortical regions. If a person doesn't have, for instance, they're not really in tune with how they feel, and they don't notice it even in their own body yet, then what a person would do, the brain spotting practitioner would do, is they would do what's called the outside window. And basically you take the pointer across, the first thing in is setting up anything in brain spotting, and how it really works is you need to find an area of emotional activation. So let's say that every time you have, every time this subject comes up, or every time you have a memory about a particular event, all the emotions and everything just flood back, and you're just like, oh, it just drives me crazy,
Right.
And that is giving evidence of an emotional access point that
Right.
is expressing itself as something that hurts. And if we have something that hurts, it needs to be healed. Right?
Right.
So, but a lot of people, they go through the motions and they, kind of like pew, 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 ricochet here, there, and everywhere, reacting with everything without having a good balance in life.
Mm-hmm.
So noticing the emotional pain. Once you have that emotional activation event, then what you do with an individual is ask the question, where do you feel it in your body? And see if they have an idea of noticing the tension that they feel. If it's something that creates high levels of anxiety, it's usually going to be up around the chest, or with some individuals, the feeling like somebody's, having their throat choked.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just that. And it can also, there can also be headaches, different pain in the head that just all of a sudden are there, shoulder pains, knee pains, foot pains, wherever it is, somatically noticing it where it is in the body as it comes into the alignment with the idea of whatever that emotional event. That way you're tying in and you're noticing with the frontal cortex. You're not overthinking it, but you're noticing with the frontal cortex, those four fingers that were on the top of everything, noticing what you're feeling emotionally and what you're experiencing physically within the body.
Right.
And once you notice that, then you can use the brain spot and you can use it to process whatever that event is. Now, if it was just starting off and had an individual, and I've had different individuals like this that, I'm 5'8", 5'9". I guess 5'8" would be, 5'9" would be a stretch. I'm not a big guy, but it's
Right.
so funny. I've got these different, different Green Berets and different special forces guys that come in and they tower over me, and they, sometimes their personality and they have a flat effect. Almost reminds me of the character Lurch on the Addams Family.
Yeah.
They have no appearance of any emotional expression. And the only thing that you can think of if you were looking at it through the eyes of somebody who wasn't aware, you would be thinking that, oh my gosh, they can kill me in 3 different ways or 10 different ways within less than a minute. They just want to hurt me, because of the demeanor and the way that they hold themselves.
Right.
But that's the condition in which they are at that moment. Some of them that have a hard time of tuning into what they feel, we can use the pointer to go across the visual spectrum, their visual from left to right, and use the pointer to be able to look for subcortical reactions. So you can start off over to a far right point, and as you take it over, you might notice that they blink really hard, or they even shift their body, or they have a hard swallow, or their hands react. You notice that their breathing gets faster. So it's all looking at it from an outside window. It's you are looking into the person subcortically and discovering what is happening at a deeper level that they may not even be aware of.
It kind of sounds like somatic experiencing a bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of it that ties in.
Okay. Yeah.
But then when you tie in the visual reference with it, it's not just noticing what you're experiencing, it's also getting to the other defragment or other fragmented files, if you will.
Right. Yep.
And which also, what I found is when individuals have that defragmentation process take place, all of the previous memories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, are available. They're not destroyed. They're just stored in a different location. And then when everything gets put back into alignment, they are able to remember happy memories that otherwise have been previously blocked off.
Right.
So it's really cool. So taking the pointer across, looking for the subcortical reactions, and then you are looking for the strongest one in which to be able to process whatever it is that they're having a problem with. So you as a practitioner would find the one that seems to be the strongest, especially if the person isn't really tuned in. And I'll give you, for example, there was a Green Beret that I had met, and he was like, well, killing is what I do for a living. I don't have any problem with that. And, he had, of course, the flat affect and everything else. I said, but you are also having relationship issues and you're not having good connectivity. You just recently gone through a divorce not too long ago, and now you are trying to engage with another person and they don't want to be in a relationship with you because you can't connect. So, it was kind of cool because this individual he didn't find me himself. It was actually his brother who lived in Puerto Rico that did some research and found me as a brain spotting practitioner. And he basically told his brother, you need to go see this guy now.
Right.
And he showed up and he's like, okay, well, I'm here, And what was interesting, yeah, he's like, okay, I'm here, fix me, whatever. I'm fine.
Right.
I don't have a problem with killing. I don't have any trauma.
Right.
And what was interesting is, even the very first session, I was like, okay, well, let's just explore. Let's do kind of across the point, and let's just see if I notice, kind of doing an outside window is what I was doing. And it got to this one point in his visual spectrum, and there was a huge upwelling of emotion that really freaked him out, took him by surprise. He's like, whoa, okay, what did you just do?
Right.
What is this? I said, well, let's just be curious. Okay. Because, he even, started tearing up and he was like, okay. And just really short breathing. And it was like, and I was like, let's just be curious. Okay. Just notice. And that's what I do with a lot of clients. And this is the process. Once you find that brain spot, the key is you notice, and you might have a different somatic shift within the body. You might have different images that come to mind. You might have different feelings that all of a sudden are there. You might have different thoughts. Think of it as the acronym SIFT. So you can have somatic images, feelings, or thoughts that come up during the process. But the key is letting it have that free flow of thought and let the genius of the brain process things more rapidly than talk therapy could ever get to.
Right.
And that gives a person a quicker access of release that enables them to be more relaxed and in their right mind rather than having that underlying driving
force in a direction.
Yeah, hypervigilance that they have no idea why it's there.
Right.
But for him, when I got to that point, what we discovered wasn't trauma, aka, yeah, I got blown up and this happened. And, what it actually was for him that became traumatic was unresolved grief from all of his friends that he had lost throughout his career.
Survivor's guilt.
Right. And the huge buildup of it, that was creating a block within him because he never had the time to process or to be able to have that kind of release.
Right.
But the next thing you know, as we were going through and with Brainspotting too, whenever you find the initial point, it can start off, usually I ask a person, or usually the question can be asked of, is emotional access. 0 would be nothing and 10 would be off the charts. And usually you find a person that say, well, about a 5 or maybe a 6. But when a person goes through and actually does the processing within the brain, because it is a fluid, intuitive process, you can have an increase of that emotional access that can peak. But once it's processed, it can fall straight back down to an even lower and better balanced state. Because it's like burping. The brain has a burp. I've had different people make the comment of, it's kind of gross, but they say it's like when you have a big zit and it needs to pop.
Right.
And once it's popped, everything's fine. And so that's the other reason why I like it, is because you don't have to go back and retell your story.
Which can be re-traumatizing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which totally makes sense, which is totally liberating for the combat veteran or for anybody who's gone through stuff that they don't want to go through it again. They don't want to talk about it.
Right. Like we've thought about it forever.
Yeah.
Which we've told the story that we remember, because like you said, our brains, we're going to create the story that we can live with. And that may not always be exactly what happened, which I thought was pretty interesting. One time we were talking, you mentioned a lady who was talking about a helicopter crash, and all she remembered was the negativity and the stuff about the crash. But when you were going through the session, she mentioned to you how beautiful the sunset was that night.
Yeah.
Like there was positive, because I had a similar thing. It wasn't with Brainspotting. It was I don't remember the modality, but I remember leaving my last call before the incident happened and seeing the same thing. It was a sunrise instead of a sunset, but I remember just being like, wow, it's really pretty, you know?
Yeah.
The fact that there was a lot of good memories surrounding the negative I never even thought of.
Absolutely. And that's the genius of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
But when we have too many emergency modes, then we wind up having an energy crisis within ourselves, which wears away and erodes our resilience.
Mm-hmm.
And when it goes unmet, that's when, like that church secretary that I had worked with, and she's like, oh, well, people just need to get over their trauma. They just need to deal with it. And I'm fine because I just pull myself up by the britches and just move on with life.
Yep.
And then she dies of a bowel aneurysm. Mysteriously unknown, just boop, gone.
Yeah.
And you're like, because the body will kill itself to keep itself alive.
Yes.
Which is interesting. But if we can learn to live and to be able to find that balance and to be able to be, instead of pushing away or ignoring it and then getting overwhelmed with it, and all of a sudden it's actually resolved,
mm-hmm.
then a person can actually move in instead of, you can have a lot of, and I've met a lot of people that intellectualize peace.
Mm-hmm.
They know how to define it and they know how to talk about it. But when it gets down to it, they've never experienced it for themselves.
Right.
And for a lot of people that have trauma in their life, and it's when it gets to be interesting, because the idea that people go, oh, well, they just need to meditate. Well, that's not safe.
Right. Sometimes that's the wrong approach. Yeah.
Right. Because you have to be respectful, and it's okay to be respectful of yourself, of what you're noticing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why a lot of other individuals really get frustrated with the entire idea of going to a counselor, because they'll go through and they'll talk therapy, and then they'll throw some meds at you if they've got, a psychiatrist.
Right.
Take this pill and you'll feel better. Well, no, it just zones you out so that you don't pay attention to it anymore.
It'll
But
make you numb, and then you just
yeah,
don't feel anything.
and which means you don't even feel your family. You can't even connect
Right.
with your family, and secondary
Mm-hmm.
trauma issues continue to be because there's no attachment, because the attachment is broken. And when the attachment is broken, it leads to more trauma. And
Right.
and it's like, can we just let's just stop for a minute. Let's take a breath. And let's just notice really what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and choose, instead of reacting in fear, let's choose to learn how to respond in love.
Be curious. Yeah.
And, in the book, I've got the diagrams and I laid it out, and it was for some individuals that were highly religious. To me, I found spiritually aligned people that look at it and they go, oh my gosh, this is why there's no spiritual transformation, and you can teach it, and this is going to be awesome. Then they go talking to some other leaders in a different place, and the next thing you know, oh no, we can't do that. And I'm like, and they get blackballed, but they saw it.
Yeah.
And then because there's other people, when I show it to them and lay it out and put it at the end, my thumbnail sketch I used to do, when I did it with the individuals that were at the addictions center, the Medicated Assistant Treatment program, and I'd lay it out for them, the people who got it the most and the quickest were the people who had experienced a lot of trauma in their life. They would look at it and they go, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Why aren't we talking about it?
It's obvious. Right.
Because to them, it's like, hello, okay, let's do this. And yet you have systems of religion and other belief systems that are traditions of men, I think would be the best way of putting it. And, if we think we're going to get to heaven on traditions of men, we're way off course, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
So brain spotting, that's something seems to be your go-to for helping people identify historical trauma that may be built up in the body.
and brain, yeah.
And brain, right? Sorry. I was curious, is like once you have that breakthrough, that'll help pass things. What kind of things might you help or teach or I don't know, like emotional, intuitive, like how do you help someone prevent future traumatic situations or elevated situations from becoming improperly stored in the body? Like, what are some techniques or ways to go about not having this become a problem again?
Well, for me, I like to go through the educational process with them. And as they're experiencing brain spotting, I also like to show them how to do it for themselves.
Okay, like self
So,
spotting, right?
yeah, self spotting. And it is a technique which basically you become your you become your therapist in a way. And it's easier whenever you've gone through the process with someone for them to be able to know, oh, I know how to do it. Because you can only do what you know. When you learn something new, then you can do it. But if you don't know, and so for instance, let me give you an example because you can even do brain spotting remotely. So I've done it with individuals um, over the phone. Say like I was in Texas and the other person, or no, one person was in Texas and I was in Florida. But we already had a working relationship, so they understood about brain spotting. Okay, so how do you do self spotting?
Mm-hmm.
Well, remember we were talking before about having an understanding of your own, about being comfortable in your own body, if you will.
Right.
In other words, when you have that knee jerk reaction, okay, what is this? Where's this really coming from? What am I feeling? Why do I feel so angry? Where am I holding
Mm-hmm.
this in my body? Oh, wait a minute. Let me look around the room. Let me ground myself for just a quick second here. Okay. No, everything in the room is completely safe. Okay. All right, brain. And sometimes depending on, you know, what it is, I'll have the person literally tap the shoulder or the knee or whatever and just basically like a snooze button and say, okay, thank you for registering the pain. I recognize that it is there. You're trying to help me to notice that there's something that is, dangerous, but I'm looking around. We're completely safe. What you think is happening right now, brain, we're good. But I'm curious about why you activated.
Mm-hmm.
What's really going on here? And so you can take these different thoughts that are there, um, because that's the other cool thing you'll notice with, and I don't mean to skip around. I know that, I have a tendency of free flow as well of thought, even in talking.
Nope. That's
Um,
good.
so when you are looking at that emotional access, and when you're looking at saying, okay, this is what I'm noticing, the different thoughts that come in line, okay, that are there of the condemning type or the um, negative thoughts, automatic
Mm-hmm.
negative thoughts, ants, okay. When you have those automatic negative thoughts that are trying to shove you back into a place, the place they're trying to shove you back into is into that emergency mode or that stronghold to try to protect you
Mm-hmm.
from circumstances that may not actually be occurring in that moment. So it's okay to be able to grab that guard at the gate that's trying to shove you back into the stronghold, which is, survival mode and creating the reactions. It's okay to be able to grab it and say, because it said, you'll never amount to anything. Okay, wait, come here. Thank you. I'm going to grab, even if you can't see me, but just imagine I'm reaching out with my hand, I'm grabbing hold of that thought and I'm pulling it up directly in front of my face and just basically saying, look, Thank you for trying to protect me. But that's not what's happening right now. And what I need you to do is I need you to go ahead and I need you to work on how we're going to be able to pay for groceries for the next 3 months. And don't come back until you have an answer. Don't come back till 8 or 9 o'clock the next morning,
Mm-hmm.
when you know I'm awake. So basically, what are you doing? You're redirecting those thoughts in the subcortical region of your brain into being more productive and goal oriented to get you to where you want to be. And in doing that, you're doing some really cool things. Number one, with the redirection of the thought, a lot of times when we go through and we have those negative thoughts, we push them away because we don't want to hear them.
Yeah. It makes us feel
Right?
bad. Yeah.
Right. I don't want to feel bad. Shut up. I'm not listening to you anymore. Go away.
Yep.
And then meanwhile, that thought goes, well, I was just trying to help. I'm just trying to protect you. Oh my goodness. And they'll go to the other emergency modes and say, hey, I need some support here. We need to get him back in. And the next thing you know, you have all of these thoughts, these massive, overwhelming thoughts just coming in from all directions to try to get you shoved back into that emergency mode where you can be safe. So if you can nip it in the bud and tell it thank you, you start working with your brain and start being able to recognize, hey, thank you for trying to protect me. That's not what's happening right now. What I need you to do in the meantime is I need you to figure out how to get this done or how to engage in a better way where I have a better relationship with the person I want to have a better relationship with. Don't come back until you have any answers. And here's the key. You've got to be specific and remember to give it a time frame to come back after you're awake. And the reason why I know this is because as I was putting this into practice, I would have these eureka moments at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because I had the solution. This is awesome. This is great. This is the answer I've been looking for. And it's in the middle of the night. Oh, great.
Right.
Now I can't go back to sleep. Okay, great. Thank you. That was sweet. Now, all right. You did exactly what I said to do.
Right.
So, but there is that part of how do I help people? And this is a part of what we're talking about right here. How do I help people to not wind up going back into those dark regions? Number one, recognize them as being a dark region, but not condemning it because it's actually doing a survival function for you. And by the genius of the brain, it's doing an incredible job at helping you to survive to live another day. So instead of condemning and judging it, we can go ahead and give it thanks. And we can say, hey, that's not really what's going on right now. This is what I need you to do. When you keep pushing things off because you don't want to deal with whatever it is that you feel because feeling is horrible and it's not safe. And you've always been told that, different comments like, well, if you want something to cry about, I'll give you something to cry about. So feelings you can't feel at all, or else you're not going to be loved. You're not going to be accepted. You're not going to be a part of the in group. So helping a person when they finally do start getting in tune with that, and once they have an experience with being able to make friends with the emotions that are there and to expand, well, life gets better all the way around. They're no longer being driven by fear, which means they are more empowered to respond in love. They have more of their energy back. The cool thing about it is when things are resolved at the subcortical level, and that's one of the things I love about Brainspotting is I've had a number of my clients that have had reoccurring nightmares. And yet we'll go back through and we'll do processing about whatever it is giving the emotional access, because it's like a Tesla ball. You get those little Tesla balls with all the electrical arcs shooting everywhere in the ball.
Mm-hmm.
and you put your finger on it and everything seems to close in. Well, I kind of noticed that was sometimes with brain spotting too, because there are so many different things in emergency modes that are ready to be able to have relief. They're looking for a way out. And so sometimes by gaining one particular point with an individual on one particular issue, other things can also kind of filter and siphon back through it for release, which is really cool. So how do I keep people from going back in there? Helping them to educate and help them to be educated about what they're experiencing and how to manage what they're experiencing to give them an even better opportunity for success in the future.
Right.
And to help them to not be afraid.
Right. Negative like feelings and thoughts, they're not bad. That's normal. It's normal to have negative and lean into it, figure out what's the deeper meaning, you know.
And when we are able to understand where that's coming from or what is creating it, then we can have an inward reconciliation with that part that had been mislabeled or had been damaged. And you can have a restoration of what was originally supposed to be instead of what wound up happening because of trauma that had been experienced.
Right.
And within that inward reconciliation, reunification from within, a greater empowerment is able to take place, a much smoother, a much greater resilience is able to be had that had been missing before. So, yeah, I know that our conversation, we've gone in all kinds of different directions, and I really appreciate.
I enjoyed it. I love it.
And, you know, there's so much more that, you know, we can talk about for sure. But whenever a person winds up having that subcortical region release that underlying drive, here's one of the keys that when I work with people, I help them to understand that when that realignment and that drive disconnects and pulls away, it is going to feel weird. There's going to be the inward stress that had always been there, the inward tension that had always been there subcortically. When it releases, it's going to feel weird. It's not going to feel normal.
Right.
And for some people, in order to feel normal, they'll create chaos so they can create a favorable environment that they're used to dealing with, rather than actually being able to be calm, cool, and collected and be at peace. They always have to have something continuing to go, so that will keep them hypervigilant because it can happen again at any moment, which means they're in survival mode.
Right. You see a lot of people, toxic relationships. You know,
Absolutely.
If their parents were toxic, they see normal relationships as toxic relationships, and then once they get in a normal relationship that doesn't have that toxicity, it's like, woof, this is boring. This is different. This isn't what I'm used to.
And they'll create the chaos themselves.
Yep. Self-sabotaging. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen that. You know, you can have an individual that has extreme, you know, complex trauma issues within the dynamics of a relationship. And, you know, from my experience, a lot of guys that haven't gone through too much stuff and they marry somebody with complex trauma that they didn't know even existed within that person.
Yeah.
They're looking at deers in a headlight look, and they're like, what the crap?
Like, where'd this come from?
Yeah. And, you know, they're dealing with the person that says, I just hate your guts and I never want to see you again, but don't leave me. I love you.
Right. All in the same breath.
Yeah. And they're like, what do I do?
Which one is it? Yeah.
And so I even have gone through and helped guys to learn how to be able to tune in to their spouse to meet them where they're at so that they can heal.
Right.
Because what happens when our own defense systems get set off by our spouse or by a loved one, and we go into a reactive mode, well, the next thing you know, big arguments are ensuing, but nobody even knows what they're arguing about anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And so the connectivity, reestablishing connectivity, helping individuals to be able to navigate through emotionally what they have experienced and being able to find release is more conducive to helping them break out of the chain of fear reaction in life and being able to be more confident and moving and responding in love.
Right.
And it's, go ahead.
And accepting just, life as it is. I feel like a lot of my issues in life is being resistant to what is, like wanting something to be different, wanting a different outcome to what happened or something like that, instead of just accepting it how it is. And for me, getting better at that has helped me find peace,
Yeah.
and that was my goal. And once you get it, it's great. Doesn't mean everything's perfect, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing about life's perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And, I don't know, something that I find encouraging is like, the more you do this practice, whether it be self-spotting, brain spotting, and just looking inward and figuring out how everything works, the more you do it, the better you get at it. I had
Absolutely. And the more natural it becomes.
Exactly. And the quicker the processing is, it doesn't take multiple sessions. You could probably figure it out in 5-10 minutes. I had a friend once who's like, oh, I've done EMDR. I've done talk therapy. I've tried it all. It's not my thing. And the only thing that I could compare it to for him was, well, you tried jujitsu. Did that make you a black belt in jiu-jitsu? It's like, you have to like continue with it and practice with it. And the more you do it, the more effective and the more proficient it becomes.
And the experience that we have with it, if you don't have an experience, we can knowledge and intellectualize anything.
Right.
But when the
Mantling
rubber
your
meets the road,
symptoms.
when we have that experience with that release,
Yeah.
then it's really something that we have to consider now in our own life because it was real. We experienced it.
Right.
We just didn't talk about it or read about it in a book. And so you might find, and here's an interesting point, brain spotting is so natural. Okay. For instance, as a counselor, if I go through and do more of an experiential type process when talking with an individual, and they start talking about something that you can see that is upsetting, and this is for everybody that can listen to this. This is something you can do. Okay, not only for yourself but also for those that are around you. Okay, so tune in to what they're saying, but also pay attention to where they're looking. Because that 1,000-yard stare or that 1,000-mile stare that people joke about, that could actually be accessing the brain spot where things are stored that need to be reconfigured and put back in place. So when you have somebody that is going through and they're expressing an emotion about their experience and they have this hard look at one particular point and they keep going and ranting, what I want you to do is I want you to think of it like they're the comet. And what you want to do is you want to align yourself and stay in the tail of the comet. You don't do anything except be present with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't argue with them. You don't, but just stay tuned in with them let them go through. They may be expressing different things, or they may not be. And if there is a lull or if there is a moment, you can always ask, well, where do you notice that you feel this in your body? And the reason why you might ask that question is to see if they can align and attune to what they're physically experiencing while they're also emotionally venting about whatever that was that they experienced.
Right.
And by allowing that and allowing them to have that release, well, you've just helped them.
Yeah.
So one of the things that, as I've talked with different practitioners and even Dr. Grand, he always envisioned a way that we might be able to help train people to be able to do this for each other, because there is a innate state of just natural occurrence that happens. And if we can tune into it and we can realize what's going on, then we can allow that process to be able to take place that helps everybody to have a better way of having a better day.
Right.
But then you have people that are nervous about, oh my goodness, well, what if I overcome that trauma that was there? And that trauma is what I needed to be angry and stay focused in my job. And, I need my pain.
Motivated. Yeah.
I need my pain. Really? How's that working for you? It looks like your family's blowing up. And, over the years, that's been the biggest heartbreak for me, especially being prior military myself. My wife and I, we have been together the whole time through my career, and even we're still together today, but it doesn't mean it's been easy because love is hard.
Right.
But when you have our best and finest and highly trained going out to destroy an enemy of America so that we can be safe and secure, only for them to come home and their families destroyed. Then the real question is, who really is winning?
Right.
Who won? What is this?
Yeah.
But not, it's not about guilt and shame and fear, but guilt and shame and fear have a lot of driven into survival mode. If we keep reacting in fear, we're going to be actually more likely to make worse decisions in our life than being able to see more accurately, to aim true to the true target that needs to be taken, what needs to be taking place within our life.
Yeah.
So in the ocean of emotion, surf's up,
Surf's up.
And we're always going to have it each and every day. And that, even brings in, the emotional needs audit, which gets into the core emotional needs that all of us have that, that I go and I do with people too. I do life coaching as well, because to me, there are some things in life that you don't need a mental health diagnosis. You just need help.
Yeah.
And, as a counselor, that's been some of the heartbreak, because I actually have seen different people, they get a diagnosis or a label, and the next thing they would have a diagnosis at age 5 of ODD, occupational defiance disorder, and they go to try to go into the military and they're rejected because they're too unstable from a diagnosis they received at 5 years old that they didn't even know about.
Right.
And you're like, what? This is silly.
Yeah.
And plus, labels do pretty good at helping us to stay stuck. Now we have an excuse of why we are doing what we're doing. Well, I can't help it because I'm bipolar.
I've seen that.
Yeah, exactly.
I did that because I have PTSD. And I'm like, that's not how that works. And it's just, I don't know.
Right. It's really cool. One of the most powerful things I love about brain spotting is being able to do it in a group setting. And the reason why I like to do it in a group setting is because I have been witness to vicarious healing that takes place when you have another person that's also going through their own process and healing. And it's really interesting. It's the dynamic of the energy within that group in that moment. And I've had other successful groups that I've done that in, where even the perception of a person's color perception actually changed,
Hmm.
because they're like, that was not that color before. And I'm like, what do you mean? I said, they would say, when I saw that and I was looking at that, it's a different color now. So what goes on in the subcortical region of our brain can definitely drive us, and it can save us, but it can also kill us,
Yeah.
because we wind up being in a different place. Um, but I definitely want to encourage anybody who is more interested in being able to check out more about what GHP actually is. And by the way, just because it is faith-based doesn't mean that um, it's popular with religious people. Because most of the
Hmm.
people that I've shown that I've found that were the most religious, it would cut to the heart, and they would literally yell at me, "Are you telling me I'm going to burn in hell?" And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. But if you have something within you that is saying that, you might want to take it into consideration, because there is a way that seems right to man that in the end leads to death. And when you take a look at between survival mode and thriving mode, or reacting in fear, responding in love, both have energy, both have power.
Hmm.
When we react in fear and use that power, it will kill you. You can get things done, but in the end, it destroys you, and it
Yeah.
creates dis-ease within your life. You're not going to be at ease. You're always going to be out of balance. You're always going to be surviving. You're always going to be trying to cling on to the next thing that you think is going to fix you, or that's going to help, or that's going to. But when you are able to get to the point of really aligning and attuning yourself to that greater power, that is, uh, there is more life, there is more love, there is no end. There is, is there going to be pain still? Yeah. But beyond the pain that we experience, greater love exists. The
Yeah.
challenge is, are we willing to be able to face whatever that pain is, so that we can come to the other side, and that we can really be set free, and no longer being driven in fear, but being able to be very focused and intentional in life, that allows extraordinary things to be able to take place, to be able to model. I had one individual that I have worked with, using the whole GHP theory, and we did some brain spotting. Um, and so he had a past of, special forces combat, and a lot of anger, domestic violence in the house, highly alcoholic. Alcohol was also involved, and family completely being destroyed, and just falling in all kinds of different pieces. He was married to an individual too that had that her husband had been killed in action.
Hmm.
And so when you look at the trauma and the dynamic of what was there, um, and he came into my office, and we had seen each other a couple of times, just briefly, but with everything that he was going through, he was so stuck inside that he intended to come, and it was in December timeframe. He said, my intent when I came there was to let you know I'm never coming back.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, I was done. Talk therapy, everything else, and just going through the motions and everything else. And I was going to give up. And I said, what happened? He goes, brain spotting.
Hmm.
He says, we sat down. He says, I was totally planning on telling you this was going to be our last session, but you sat down, we sat down and we did the brain spotting. And there was something at my core that totally shifted. And I'm not angry anymore. I don't even have any fear of being angry anymore, of being the person who I had been before.
Hmm. That's powerful.
And he said, the problem is now trying to help other people be able to see who I really am instead of what I had been showing them before in the past, and trying to help them to understand this isn't a trick.
Right.
I've had a genuine transformation and I'm never going back, and I can't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to this day, what's interesting is because of some of the model behavior, he's also noticing some of the different reactivity and behavior with his youngest son. But now we've been able to work together and how to engage with that in the same way of tuning into himself, also tuning into that emotional activation and helping him to stay tuned in within that to be able to discover, and keep in mind that you can only do what you know. And because that's what his son grew up also being a witness to, there's a lot of anger because of the disconnect, but they're finding a better way of reconnecting. And as well as with the family as a whole, what seemed to be impending doom and gloom, and this was it, and everything blowing up, has actually gotten to a place where they're the consideration for, no kidding, genuine reconciliation is able to start taking place, which is phenomenal. Um,
That is awesome.
and it's doable, but as I tell all of my clients, it is going to be the most difficult, easy thing you do.
Mm-hmm. Reminds me of my
Difficult
favorite
because
quote.
you cannot, number one, you cannot think your brain,
Yep.
but you can notice it. And whenever you see the behavior that it's trying to push you into, if you recognize it as maybe it's trying to push me into a survival mode or a stronghold of survival, what is that? Where is that at? What is that
Right.
underlying undercore subcortical driving force that keeps me reacting in fear? Let's be curious. Let's explore it. We don't have to be afraid of it. It's just the genius of the brain doing its job. But now that we know, then we could do differently. And we can address what's happening at that subcortical level and have a reestablishment of the different parts that have been broken off throughout life that have left us being less than.
Right.
And then with the inward reconciliation of those different parts and having everything come back together and the original design of the way it was supposed to be, instead of the survival mode in which it wound up existing. Well, that's transformational. That's true empowerment. That's freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Yeah.
any other questions that you have for me?
No, there's one. It's about the four pillars. I really thought that that was a fun little spat that we had the other day. Other than that, no, I was just going to ask you if someone was looking for more information about GHP or brain spotting, where can they go to find more of your work? What was the name of your book? And yeah, I think that
Okay.
was going to be about it.
Well, my website that I have for my private practice in Florida on the Panhandle. I call it Trauma Central because within the surrounding area, I live right by Eglin Air Force Base, and that's where Niceville, Florida is. But you got all the different kinds of special forces, even for Air Force, Army, uh, Air Reserve. Then you got all the Eglin Air Force
EOD.
Base, Maine, and then you got EOD school, you got Ranger school, you've got there's no shortage of hurting people to help.
Mm-hmm.
But the website, my website is ghpcounselingservices.com. And this last year, of course, I had written, I got my book published with Westbow Press. It took me a long time to be able to get it printed out because, paralysis of analysis. And then about the time I think that there were other things that I started noticing. So I put it out there as my first ultimate stab, but there's other work that's going along with it that I will be incorporating into future seminars and or retreats. I'm also open to doing those type things, or if there are other individuals that wanted me to do a online overview of God's healing process, aka GHP, and how it actually deals within the trauma spectrum in a faith-based way. I am definitely open to that, and you can reach out through the contact us on the web page. Let's see here.
And
Also,
I'll add all that in the show notes too, so it's easy for anyone to find. Just click
okay,
below wherever you're listening from.
yeah, and the book is on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Kindle. It's out there in the wide world. The name of it is God's Healing Process: An Everyday State of Grace Existence. Or an everyday state of grace. Yeah, existence. I put an experience on my email to you, but it is everyday state of grace existence.
Okay.
And it also has been translated into Spanish as well. But my Spanish isn't that good, so I'm not going to say it out loud.
All right. Mine is not either.
But it is translated into Spanish, and I do work with individuals in Brazil, and as well as a group in Ecuador that is also going through spiritual formation, and as well as more discussions about alignment and attunement with God, how to be able to achieve that, being able to achieve and having that peace that surpasses understanding, what it really means, how it really lines up and attunes. Because, each and every day when we wake up, we're actually on a co-mission with God. So the Great Commission is actually a co-mission that we're on each and every day that we get up. And as we do that, we don't have to plan anything. It's more about being present in the moment to be able to meet those who God is bringing to us to be able to help and meet in that moment. We don't have to be genius. All we have to do is be and let him work through us to make that effectual difference with that person. Tuning in, actually listening to what they're saying, hearing them. Mm-hmm. And in that, we can also help facilitate the greater healing that is needing to take place. And in doing that, we are actually entering into a place where we can also heal ourselves within ourselves. And that's the really cool part about it. It's that grace begets grace, faith begets faith, love begets love, healing begets healing. And, in the world that we live in, we definitely need a lot more of that than other things that are currently being driven. And we need to face those forces of darkness that want to drive people by fear into doing those things which are not convenient and destructive. So, So within that, I really appreciate being able to be on the show today.
I really appreciate you joining. It was really fun. I love talking with you.
Yeah, I do life coaching, and in the life coaching, there's many different facets. And so if anybody would be interested in not doing counseling, but life coaching, that's cool. We can do that. If a person wanted to be able to do more spiritual formation and more about the GHP thing, definitely give me a call because I'm the primary one that's developed it. So, but within that dynamic, it is, I find it to be very, very effective and very powerful in people's lives that allow spiritual transformation to actually take place. So, any way that I can help to be able to facilitate, just remember, if you have issues that need tissues and you need help to be able to find a better way of having a better day, call me.
I love it. And with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, Dr. Copeland.
You bet.